Hello guys, this is Blank the Hero come back with another What If Naruto Sealing Go Wrong Part 2, and if you like to check out the creator of the fanfic, link will be in the description down below, and if you want more video please leave a like and subscribe for more. Chapter 3. A reluctant return. Sandaime and his guest looked at each other momentarily with no words being exchanged between them. After a brief moment of silence between the two of them, Sandaime spoke. Senju Tsunade, it's been a long while. Yes it has, Sarutobi-sensei, Tsunade replied to her former sensei. She was currently in her late 30s and was known by many as the Sucker, one of the legendary Sannin. Tsunade remarked, the Anbu you sent to find me told me that a terrible event happened in here a week ago. Judging from the damages and the looks on the people's faces, I'd say a lot more has happened than what the Anbu was willing to let on. Hiruzen. He also told me that there was another major issue at hand here that was a matter of the utmost importance that requires my presence before you. He wouldn't tell me what it was, saying that only you alone could tell me since it was highly confidential for only my ears to hear. Momentarily paused. In truth, I truly didn't want to return to this village again, although I reluctantly did so since you personally requested my audience. Hiruzen sighed. I understand that a great deal has happened in your life which caused you to grow bitter towards your home village, and I won't make any excuses about it. Before Tsunade said another word, her eyes caught sight of a baby's crib that was at the side of Hiruzen's office. Curiously, she went over to the crib and looked inside of it, seeing a week-old baby boy sleeping peacefully inside. Her mood started to lighten up upon seeing the child. Smiling at the newborn, she asked her former sensei, who's the cute blonde-haired infant? Certainly he can't be your grandchild, yes? You're right, he's not my grandchild, Hiruzen replied. His name is Naruto and he's Yandaime's son and heir. The Sannin's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing those words. Minato had a kid, Tsunade said in surprise and happily. Speaking of Minato, where is he and his wife Kushina? Is Yandaime out on some diplomatic business trip in another village with you covering for him here, especially after everything that's happened? And where's the boy's mother? Tsunade saw a certain look on Sarutobi's face, which was a bad omen. Tsunade, Hiruzen started, I humbly ask for you to adopt Minato's child. That was when she looked at her former sensei as if he lost his mind. You want me to do what? Tsunade shouted, causing Naruto to wake up and start crying. Hiruzen sighed again as he went over to Naruto, lifting him out of his crib and into his arms, eventually calming the child. Adopt Minato's son? Tsunade asked in disbelief. Have you lost your mind? Exactly where is Minato and his wife? Tsunade, Hiruzen replied quickly, cutting Tsunade off. Please calm yourself down, Tsunade. In a calmer tone he suggested, take a seat, Tsunade. There's something that I have to tell you. Sad to say you're not going to like what you're going to hear. Having no other option, Tsunade pulled up a seat and sat down as her former sensei advised. Hiruzen pulled his office seat over towards his former student and sat down on it with Naruto still cradled in his arms. Hiruzen began explaining, a week ago, the great monster known as Kiwabi no Yoko came and attacked the village. Days before the monster's attack, however, Minato received word from one of his top shinobi about Kiwabi's eventual arrival to Konoha. As you're well aware, Tsunade, Kiwabi's existence was no myth to Konohagakure even before its attack. The people knew what the monster was capable of doing after hearing many stories about the beast's power. Many, however, couldn't understand why Kiwabi was coming to attack Konoha, killing and destroying everything in its path as it made its way to our village. Minato worked night and day trying to find ways of stopping the creature, but had little success. It was a profound burden for him, and the fact that his wife was about to go into premature labor because of the heavy stress and frustration both of them were in wasn't helping. Was married to a most skilled kunoichi who was pregnant with their child. What they don't know is that she went into labor prematurely because of the intense stress both her and her husband were in on the night of Kiwabi's attack. She was secretly rushed to a private medical tent during the attack where to gave birth to their son. Sadly though, because of his wife's severe emotional distress and weakened condition, Kushina died shortly after giving birth to Naruto, and the news of his wife's death devastated Minato. Tsunade was already feeling her tears building up in her eyes before they started falling free down her face. Sarutobi continued, and what severely added more pain to Minato was the ancient Kinjutsu Aoji he finally found to seal away and imprison the Kiwabi no Yoko. The beast, however, was too powerful to be contained in any inorganic vessel, or animal. This Kinjutsu Aoji required a newborn human child whose umbilical cord was freshly cut, and there was no other child born that night except his own. In performing the Kinjutsu, the sealer would have to surrender his or her life for the Kinjutsu Aoji to take its effects. Sadly, I could still remember the demolished look on Minato's face when he saw that his whole life's work and the family he so eagerly wanted to have with his wife and son were destroyed within such a short time and reduced to nothing. Even if there was another child born that night, Minato wouldn't have asked any parent to sacrifice their child, or even a child born on that same night who became an orphan simultaneously after losing both his or her parents as a result of Kiwabi's attack, into such a harsh burden, especially if he himself wasn't willing to do it with his own child. Therefore he used and sacrificed his own newly born child and his own life for the ritual to seal away the Kiwabi. It was a tragic and cruel burden that broke Yandame's heart, knowing that he lost everything he held dear all in one night, for the preservation of Konohagakure and preventing Kiwabi from doing more destruction and slaughtering than what it already had done. Tsunade started sobbing as more tears came down her face. Hearing this story made her hate the position of Hokage all the more, since she lost loved ones who were in some ways connected with the title of Hokage. Hiruzen himself couldn't help but let a few of his own tears fall from his face while retelling the horrific event in detail. He wiped away the tears that fell upon Naruto's face before he continued. Before Minato went to battle the Kiwabi, he asked for one private moment alone with Naruto. I respected his wish, although I stayed close enough to the tent to hear what Yandame was saying. While alone with his son in the tent, Minato allowed some of his tears he held back to fall freely, while cradling Naruto in his arms, apologizing and telling Naruto that this wasn't what he wanted for him. I remember him telling Naruto that he wanted him to grow up in a village where he could have grown and matured into a great shinobi and inherit the village's will of fire with both himself and his mother, and be loved by everyone in the village, not only as his honorable son but also as Namake's Naruto. But Yandame knew that wasn't to be because of the monster that attacked and ruined all of his dreams. Yandame knew that he had to do something, since it was both his duty as the Hokage and as a father to protect Konohagakure, to make sure his son had a future in the village he loved so much. Namake's Naruto, my son, you'll be the hero who defeated Kiwabi no Yoko and saved Konohagakure no Sato, Minato whispered to Naruto before calling me back to explain what he wanted me to do. Yandame made it very clear that he didn't want the villagers to know of his son's existence, at least not yet. Originally his intention was for Naruto to be regarded as the great hero who saved Konoha by sealing and imprisoning Kiwabi into him. The child's name was changed from Namake's Naruto to Uzumaki Naruto. He was giving his mother's maiden last name in order to protect his true identity and heritage. Although I wished there was another way to bring down Kiwabi, however, I knew that a severe price had to be paid to stop the creature. Naruto was to be made into a living sacrifice, with his father giving up his life in order to save Konoha and all who live here. Tsunade didn't want to hear the story any further. Her heart was breaking. It was too tragic and horrible to bear. Before she could interject and tell her former sensei to stop telling her the story, Hiruzen added, however, the situation had taken an unexpected twist after the Kinjutsu was performed. Tsunade's head shot up upon hearing what her former sensei said. He continued, a very strong chakra made its way towards Naruto and infused itself into the boy's belly. However, this chakra wasn't red as we had anticipated. Rather, it was blue. No one knows what happened to Kiwabe after the Kinjutsu was initiated, but one thing is certain: Yondaime was sealed into Naruto. The Sanin's eyes widened in shock and absolute disbelief. She remained silent as her former sensei allowed her to process everything he told her up to now. A moment later, Sandaime went on, no one else outside the village council besides you and a few Anbu who's been sworn to secrecy knows this. As far as the rest of the villagers know, Yondaime, his wife and child are dead, along with many others who lost their lives during the attack. Tsunade was left speechless at everything she was hearing. It was so overwhelming both mentally and emotionally. She didn't know how much more she could handle, and she knew that Hiruzen wasn't finished. As a result of this unexpected turn of events, the council and I realized that the situation concerning Naruto has drastically changed. With the boy having Minato sealed into his being, there's no doubt that he'll undergo certain physical and psychological changes in his development and acquire all, if not most, of everything that made Yondaime Hokage the man and shinobi he became known to be in Konoha and the rest of the shinobi world. You mean to say that Minato will take over his own son's body? Tsunade asked in disbelief. No, Hiruzen quickly replied reassuringly, rather, Naruto will inherit and absorb his father's knowledge, wisdom, stamina, abilities and chakra in a gradual process as he grows up, basically becoming a born Hokage. The child will still be his own individual person, not Yondaime incarnate. Because of this, Naruto is in more danger than before. It would have been hard enough should we have let everyone know that Minato had a surviving child, with countless people seeking to spoil, pamper or adopt the young boy for their own intentions and possibly to get a hold on Naruto's huge inheritance. It's worse now with Yondaime sealed inside him, and if enemy villages and nations discover this secret, one of two worst-case scenarios could happen. 1. They could either attempt to murder the child, or 2, which is most likely, they'll try to kidnap the child and raise him to be part of their nation, thus corrupting the child and making him our enemy. Either scenarios would prove disastrous for Konoha and Naruto, and perhaps other villages and nations should they cross his path. Sandaime took a moment to look at Naruto, who was now fully awake and looking around the environment he wasn't so familiar with. Sighing, Sandaime continued, the truth is, I would have gladly took it upon myself to raise the child and guide his upbringing. However, my reinstatement as the Hokage heavily limits the amount of time I can spend with the boy, and I can't entrust him with just anyone in the village, not even with any of the clan leaders or village elders. And the last thing we need is Naruto turning out like Orochimaru. I don't want history to repeat itself with Naruto causing him to become something perhaps worse than Orochimaru himself. Tsunade remained silent. The memory and hurt of Orochimaru's betrayal was still fresh in her mind. Jiraiya isn't the raising little children type, and his role as the author of those books you hate so passionately wouldn't help in the child's development. For once I agree with you, Tsunade remarked, although you're being a bit hypocritical since you also read those books like some closet perverts. I know." Annoyed by her comment, Sarutobi cleared his throat and continued on with a more serious demeanor. "The fact that I'm asking you to adopt and raise Yandame's son shows the amount of conviction and belief I have in your ability to raise, control and balance the child since he's been infused with a powerful Hokage. But still, Naruto is an innocent child who's been forced to shoulder this heavy burden without his consent. He needs someone who can properly raise and ensure his tutelage, and show him motherly affections on top of that. I'm more than certain you can also teach him in the advanced arts of medical and healing jutsus." Tsunade heard a lot more than she was bargaining for. It was too overwhelming for her at the moment. Sandaime knew that she already went through a lot in Konoha, and the fact that she lost most those she loved dearly, among them being her grandfather and granduncle, the Shodame and Nidame, her lover and her little brother, both of whom wanted to become Hokage, left her with bitterness about her home village. After learning what became of Yondaime and his family, and the village as a whole, it was too much. And now she's being asked by her former sensei to adopt and raise Yondaime Hokage's child as her own. "I need some time to think about this," Tsunade honestly admitted with the most calm demeanor with mixed emotions in her voice. Hiruzen didn't argue with her and replied understandably, "I understand, Tsunade. Take as much time as you need." Tsunade reached out to Sarutobi, signaling to him that she wanted to hold the child. Complying, he handed Naruto over to her. She cradled the fully awakened child in her arms, who seemed to be looking at her in wonder. He yawned and closed his eyes for a moment before looking at her again. "Only a week old and already you have to carry such heavy burden," Tsunade said softly to Naruto as a few tears slid down her face as he gurgled. Hiruzen smiled and watched the scene quietly. Mother and child, seeing his former pupil smiling brightly down at what he hopes will be her soon-to-be adopted son, made Hiruzen suddenly overcome with an overwhelming sense of hope for the future. It was odd how, even in the aftermath of the bleakest days, he had found such a glowing sight. He didn't know what the future had in store for these two, but he was grateful that Tsunade was at least willing to consider adopting the child. Chapter 4, Worst Case Scenario. Later that night, Tsunade was staying at a hotel for the night, at least one that wasn't demolished or damaged during Kiwabi's attack. She got little rest that night as she thought about everything that happened early that afternoon in Sandaime's office. She spent the rest of the day thinking about all that was explained to her in detail from her former sensei and what he was asking of her. In truth, she felt she didn't owe the village any favors, especially after all that she suffered and been through in the village. However, Naruto was a whole other story. He was an innocent child who's been overwhelmingly burdened with so much at a most tender and fragile age. He's only a week old, Tsunade thought to herself as she sat on her bed in her sleeping kimono. It was true that many other children of Konoha besides Naruto have been plagued with a great loss because of that bastard nine-tailed monster. However, Naruto was a very special case. In spite of what happened with all the other children who may have lost their parents, families and friends during the attack, they still had the opportunity to rebuild their lives from scratch and start life anew in the village with the help of their fellow villagers and Sandaime. Naruto, on the other hand, couldn't just go about like that, especially since he was infused with Yondaime Hokage. Two of her relatives were the first two Hokages who built Konohagakure no Sato, and they died young. Her little brother and lover Dan both wanted to become Hokage because of their intense love for the village and strong desire to protect it, and they both died young before they could live out their desires. Now she's being asked to adopt and raise a newborn child only a week old who will inevitably grow and mature into a strong Hokage at an unknown young age. that is if the child lives long enough for that to happen. Life is so cruel to me with its ironies, she thought to herself as she meditated on Naruto's present situation while fiddling with the necklace around her neck, the one that once belonged to her grandfather, Senju Hashirama, Shodame Hokage. Naruto most likely wouldn't get to live a normal life as a result of the changes he'll undergo. On top of that, all of his father's enemies will now become his enemies, and his father has made a lot of enemies before and after becoming Yondaime Hokage. In some ways, the child was going to become the new Yondaime Hokage, she figured, and it was unknown how Naruto was going to turn out since he would develop his own personality that will undoubtedly be influenced with some of his father's characteristics. Naruto is an innocent child who's been forced to shoulder this heavy burden without his consent. He needs someone who can properly raise and ensure his tutelage, and show him motherly affections on top of that. Those were Hisazen's exact words to her. Tsunade wondered if she was even fit for the role as a mother since she never had children of her own. Sure, she helped out midwives and nursing mothers with their children in the hospitals and observed how they nurtured their babies. But actually playing the role of nurturing a baby is a whole different story, she acknowledged, and she never nurtured children before. After the death of her lover Dan before they had the chance to marry, she lost most of her interests and desires to get married and have children. And now she's being asked by Hiruzen to adopt and raise a child who's inescapably going to develop into a new Yondaime Hokage. Tsunade snapped out of her thoughts as she thought when she heard a knock come from the door. Turning to the door, she said, "Yes?" "Tsunade-sensei," replied a young feminine voice from the other side of the door. "May I come in?" Sighing, Tsunade answered, "You can come in, Shizune." The young 15-year-old girl entered her sensei's room. Shizune entered her sensei's room and went over to her. "Are you all right, Tsunade-sensei?" Shizune asked in concern. Tsunade looked at the young girl and said, "I'm fine." "Why are you awake?" "I can ask the same of you," Shizune remarked. Tsunade said nothing as she looked away from the young girl. Seeing the expression on the older woman's face, Shizune asked, "Is there something on your mind?" "Beside what Sandaime told me," Tsunade remarked, "not much." "What did he tell you?" Shizune inquired. "Do you want to talk about it?" Tsunade turned to face the young teen girl. After what felt like an eternity, Tsunade spoke with a serious tone. "Before I tell you, you must swear to never repeat what I'm going to tell you to anyone outside this room." Shizune felt the firmness of her sensei's voice and realized that what was on her mind was no laughing matter nor something to take lightly. Shizune answered sincerely, "I swear it. I give you my sincere word." After taking a breath, Tsunade began relating everything to Shizune in full detail about everything she was told from his Yun. Shizune listened intently as her sensei told her the story uninterrupted. What the young girl heard shocked her to no end, and there was more Tsunade had to tell her. Shizune already had tears falling down her face with some sobbing upon hearing the harsh and tragic account about Yondaime and his son Naruto. This heartbreaking revelation was beyond anything she was expecting to hear. Tsunade herself let a few tears fall down from her face before wiping them away. After Tsunade was done telling Shizune the full account regarding Yondaime and Naruto, she gave the young teen girl some time to absorb everything she was told. A few moments later, Shizune regained her composure as she wiped away the tears from her face. She turned to her sensei and asked, "So no one knows what happened to Kiwabi no Kitsune?" Tsunade shook her head. "Not that anyone is complaining. However, it does raises some concern, at least to the Hokage and myself." "But will you adopt baby Naruto?" "I have been thinking about that since I left the office," Tsunade admitted. I haven't exactly decided on whether or not I should. Why not? Shizune asked. It's not like you'll be handling him on your own. You'll have me here to help you take care of the child. Besides, I always wanted a baby brother. And who wouldn't want a little brother who's a Hokage? Tsunade looked at her young apprentice with a blank expression. Upon realizing her words, Shizune immediately apologized. Tsunade-sensei, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings and reopen old wounds. I mean, what I meant to say is it's all right, Shizune, Tsunade assured, knowing fully well that the Shizune was referring to her late kid brother. I know you weren't trying to offend me. You just got caught up in the moment, that's all. But still, adopting this particular child will be no walk in the park. Hell, adopting and raising any child is no walk in the park and will require a great deal of sacrifices to be made. Tsunade saw the irony with the word sacrifice, especially since Naruto was originally made into a living sacrifice to protect all of the future generations of Konoha and everyone else. Shizune. However, Tsunade continued, Naruto is not just any child who can be adopted and raised by just anyone. I'm amazed that Sarutobi-sensei went so far as to send one of his Anbu to find me in order to ask me to raise the child as my own son. Sighed, I'm not even sure if I'm even mother material. Don't say such things, Tsunade-sensei, Shizune retorted with conviction. Sure, you're not perfect and have some bad habits, but hey, no one's perfect and we all have our share of problems. But I've been with you long enough to know that you'd make a terrific mother to that child, and so does Sandaime-sama. After all, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to find you if he thought you were inadequate or unfit to raise Naruto or any other child for that matter. The Hokage chose you, Tsunade-sensei, out of all people, shinobi, clan leaders and village elders, to raise this child who possesses untold potentials. Of course, he could have chosen any other mother in the village to adopt Naruto. However, he saw something very special in you, Tsunade-sensei, that you might have not seen in yourself to move him to believe so strongly that you were fit to become Naruto's new mother. I strongly believe that you'd make a terrific mother to any child, blood-related or not. And I know your little brother and Uncle Dan would have felt the same way about you. Tsunade stood there in awe at Shizune. Her heartfelt words were filled with wisdom beyond her age. It amazed the older woman that her young apprentice could make her see and acknowledge something like this. Thank you, Shizune, Tsunade said appreciatively as she wiped away the new tears that fell from her eyes before smiling. I really needed to hear that. And those words coming from you really mean a lot to me. Shizune smiled, knowing that she managed to heal and restore her sensei's self-confidence. Unknown to the two women was that there was someone listening to the entire conversation from behind the door. The revelation about baby Naruto possessing Yondaime Hokage inside him and eventually acquiring Yondaime's attributes greatly intrigued the interloper. The possibilities with this new Yondaime Hokage are truly unique, the interloper thought before exiting quietly before being detected. Hours later that night. Elsewhere, at an undisclosed location, Naruto was sleeping peacefully in a room guarded outside with two Anbu. No one without authorization from the Hokage himself was allowed into the room. 15 minutes later, the Anbu saw Sandaime making his way towards them. Sandaime-sama, the Anbu said as the two of them bowed in respects to the elderly Hokage, who nodded and greeted them. Is everything all right here? Inquired Sandaime. The first Anbu answered, Uzumaki Naruto is resting quietly, sir. No troubles have arisen, Sandaime-sama. That's good to hear, Sandaime replied. I will like to check up on the child now. The Anbu nodded and stepped to the side as Sandaime entered the room before closing the door behind him. Sandame afterwards quietly walked over to Naruto's crib and looked down at the young boy, before forming a sinister smile on his face. A while later, the two Anbu waited outside the room for Sandame to exit. As they waited, a voice from behind them asked, "Is everything all right here?" The two Anbu turned speedily in surprise to see Sandame approaching them with two other Anbu following him to relieve their fellow Anbu from their watch. As Sandame-sama, the second Anbu exclaimed in confusion, "Didn't you just enter inside the room a while ago?" In seconds Sarutobi registered what just happened as his eyes widened in horror and shock. "What?" Sandame exclaimed before running to the door, finding it locked. "Shit," Sandame cursed before breaking the door down, storming into the room with the four Anbu following. They came to see an empty crib and an opened window. Whoever came into the room had posed as him using a henge no jutsu and kidnapped Naruto. But the question was who and how did he or she find out about Naruto? This was exactly the situation that Sandame feared would occur, and to his horror it didn't take long for this secret to somehow get out. Turning to the four Anbu, Sandame ordered with full authority, "Lock the village down and station as many Junins and Chunins at all exit ports to the village as you can. Gather all of the Anbu, and explain to them that Naruto has been kidnapped. Search the village. Search everywhere. I want Naruto found and the kidnapper brought in alive for questioning. We need to find out if he or she is working alone or with an accomplice." "Hai." The four Anbu complied, disappearing in a puff of smoke. Turning to the empty crib, Sandame thought, "This is exactly what I feared. Enemy forces coming against us during our weakest and most vulnerable moments right after a most catastrophic event. Yandame, for your son's sake and the sake of the entire village, I hope Naruto will be found and brought back safely and fast." Meanwhile, Tsunade was finding it hard to sleep with all the commotion going on outside. She put the pillow over her head to try to drown out the noise, but it was to no avail. Frustrated, she got up and walked over to her bedroom door and opened it. Upon stepping out though, she stepped on something with her bare foot. Looking door, she saw something that wasn't in the apartment before, which didn't belong to either her or Shizune. It was a note paper that had names of clans and organizations written down on it. Someone was here, Tsunade realized. A moment later, Shizune ran into the apartment and went over to her sensei. "Tsunade-sensei," Shizune called out. Turning to the young girl, Tsunade asked, "What is it?" "All of the exit ports have been sealed off," Shizune explained. "The village is under complete lockdown by order of the Hokage. From what I've heard, there's been a kidnapping of some sort." It hit Tsunade like a ton of rocks as she looked at the note paper in her hands. Clenching the paper tightly until it was crumbled in her fist angrily, Tsunade said, "Wait here." Not waiting for a reply, Tsunade stormed out of the apartment. "Tsunade-sensei," Shizune cried out, but her cries fell on deaf ears as Tsunade speedily ran out to pursue and apprehend the kidnapper. She didn't care about the fact that she was barefooted and still in her sleeping kimono. All that mattered to her was getting to and rescuing Naruto in time. From breaking an entry into her private lodging to kidnapping the newborn that was meant for her to adopt, for what